In his first speech officially as president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu has shared what his vision for Nigeria is in the 4 years that he will be at the helm of affairs. Addressing Nigerians after his swearing in, President Tinubu touched on the country's exchange rate situation, electricity, and creating jobs via the digital economy. He spoke about a remodeled economy that would bring about growth and development through job creation and food security. Tinubu says he plans to target higher GDP growth and significantly reduce unemployment. On one of the most contentious issues left over from the Buhari administration, President Tinubu announced that subsidy was in fact coming to an end and that the funds would be rechanneled into better investment in public infrastructure, education, healthcare, and jobs. Mukhtar Mohammed, financial analyst and the CEO of Astra Dynamic Solutions, joins me now as we look at a few points from the president's speech. Mukhtar, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure. Good morning.
So, Mukhtar, before we get into our conversation, Perpetual Fasami Peter is out on the street because we know with the president's announcement that subsidy has been removed, we've seen a return to fuel queues in Lagos and Abuja and other parts of the country. So let's quickly see what's going on the streets and then we'll get the conversation started. Let's head to Perpetual now.
Of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, there have been speculations about his stance on fuel subsidy removal. Owing to this, some fuel stations have started either hoarding their products or some of them were already selling at exorbitant prices. However, less than 24 hours after the inaugural speech that was made by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, when he said that fuel subsidy will no longer be allowed. But what we see here is a reflection of what is happening in some other fuel stations around Nigeria. Though here somewhere along Amadubedo Way, Victoria Island, Lagos, we see that the petroleum products, PMS, that's where motor spirit, is sold at the official 185 naira. But this is not the case in some of the fuel stations where we see that the price has skyrocketed, hitting as high as 300 naira. Well, it remains to be seen where this is taking us, and of course, as News Century, we promise to keep monitoring the event and we'll bring you the update as events unfold. Perpetual Fasami Peter reporting for News Century.
All right, so we, of course, will stay with this story as it's been one of the fastest responses to anything we've seen. So, Mukhtar, when you look at it, it's been almost an immediate response. From the moment the president made the speech, as I was leaving the office, fuel queues were already building here on the island and then into other parts of Lagos. But in parts of what we've also seen, a very basic question to start off with. Do you really think this is the end of the subsidy?
Well, I wish it's the end of subsidy. You know, I've always been an advocate of removal of subsidy. But again, I think we need to also look at the timing of his speech because you don't know what is there until you get into the office and begin to see some details. In as much as I agree that the removal of subsidy is necessary, but I still think he should have engaged the stakeholder because this is going to cause a lot of chaos in the system, and that is already happening. I am an advocate of removal of subsidy, but I don't think Mr. President should have done that. He would have just highlighted it as one of those issues that he needs to address, the subsidy payment scheme. And then, I mean, would have sat down with his team and looked at how do we go about removal of subsidy that will not be of damaging effect on Nigeria, because already we are struggling with inflation officially at 22%. But, you know, if you go by what the World Bank is saying, if you go by house to house, house to house, the way inflation is being done, we're looking at their earnings, looking at, you know, that we should be doing almost 30 or 35% in terms of inflation. So he needed to sit down because PMS evoke around everything in Nigeria because our major transport network, that's what the transportation system, that's what they use. So definitely, I think he got it right that subsidy should go, but I think he should sit down and work it out, especially when you know that businessmen will always cash on it. Because what we're seeing now is that people that got that product at the official rate from the depot and who will enjoy subsidy on those payments are now selling it high, and it's causing a lot of hardship on Nigerians.
And that's actually my next point, because the product that's being sold right now, is product that's been brought in subsidized at a subsidized rate right now. There should currently be no scarcity or even no panic buying, because the subsidy is meant to run until the end of June. So whatever product is available to Nigerians has been brought in subsidized already. So when you talk about having the president sit down and sort of work this through, and we hear from Ipman that there's further dialogue needed, it's these kind of situations that people are trying to avoid. So now cost of transportation has gone up. Probably cost of food is going to follow in the coming days as well. But Nigerians are currently right now struggling to pay more for products that were brought in subsidized. Is there any way that we would have handled this? Because even if the president said in his speech that, okay, starting from Monday, subsidy is gone, we would have still sort of seen this same situation.
Well, we need to look at it this way. The president did not particularly say the day that subsidy will be gone. I think in his speech, he just said subsidy will be removed. And he made the provision that the outgoing administration did not make provision for him for subsidy. I think that's where, but we know that the outgoing administration said that subsidy will be paid till the end of June. So that means provision have been made for subsidy till the end of June. I think that's where I think the whole issue is. Whether we get to the situation that we are now, even if he has done it in June, we might, but we might not. Again, when we say we might, it could be at that time would have engaged Nigerians, would have known the price, and everybody would have been prepared for it. Because now you're looking at people coming up with permutation. Will it be 400? Will it be 700? And in some states, like in the Niger Delta, the fuel has already gone to about 600 naira per liters. And I think for a subsidized, they are selling out of what, like you said, what has been subsidized is now being sold 600 naira. So they are making a kill out of Nigerians. So I think whatever time we would have made the decision or made the announcement, it would have caused panic, but it would not have been as what is happening now, because it's not only just causing panic in terms of price appreciation, it's causing a lot of manpower with lost again in traffic. And we are beginning to see the return of what we thought the whole idea of removal subsidy will solve, which will be no more queue in our filling station, provide more opportunity for investment in the oil and gas sector, and also make it more competitive for a lot of Nigerians to begin to enjoy from the wealth of our key stream, which would have been that the NNPC would have been listed as a public company in the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and investors will be able to take part of it. But with this kind of statement he has made, all is beginning to make a mess of every good thing that this removal of subsidy can add to our economy.
All right, so finally on this subsidy issue, so while, as you said, the president hasn't said specifically when the subsidy ends, knowing that there is provision in the budget until at least June 30th of this year, Nigeria's government sets the PMS price at the pump. And while we're seeing price variations, as you've mentioned, across the country right now, there's been actually no official announcement as to a change in the pump price. So what factors must Nigerians know will go into the pricing of PMS when subsidy is removed? Even though right now, it should be a situation where Nigerians are protesting because there has been no official announcement, and the products that are being bought at these rates now are products that were brought in subsidized. But when we look at the factors that will come to play when we put in the price, what do we think are those factors?
Number one, the first factor is the exchange rate. It's going to be a major factor because we're looking at exchange rates. Will it be at 600? Will it be at 450? Will it be at 460? Will it be at 750? That is a major crunch of the matter that will determine the exact price of every petroleum product. International price is steady at where it is, and so it's fine. Then the landing costs and the movement and that. But one thing I want Nigerians to know is that if we come to really full deregulation, we should not expect the price of fuel to be in Lagos the same thing that what you obtain in Ibadan, even in Oyo State, or even in Abeokuta in Ogun State, close to us here, because they are going to begin to look at cost of movement, transportation of those goods, because the point of delivery is in Lagos. They still bet in Lagos, and so when they bet in Lagos, then the cost from taking it from Lagos to Victoria Island is different from the cost taking it from Lagos to Ibadan. So definitely we'll see a variation in terms of prices. And those are things that I think, but the major challenge will be the exchange rate, because you want to see what price will be. And again, will it still be only NNPC that will be importing this product, or independent marketer or major marketers will not become part of it?
All right, you answered the question I was going to sneak in about the price variations further inland when this happens, but let's move on from there. So exchange rates is actually the next point of the conversation because President Tinubu spoke on the Naira redesign policy of the Central Bank of Nigeria, describing it as harshly applied and said that it would be reviewed. He also said that his administration would treat both the old and new currencies as legal tender. But beyond that, the new president said monetary policy needs a thorough house cleaning, and the CBN must work towards a unified exchange rate. So while we expect to hear more about the how of many of his economic plans in the coming days and weeks, Mukhtar, let's look at this exchange rate issue. It's one we've spoken about numerous times, bringing together what is multiple windows, multiple exchange rates, running into 5, 6, 7 sometimes, depending on what situation you find yourself in Nigeria. But how or should this be done? How will it be done? Should it be done? Or not definitely should, but how should it be done?
Well, when you're thinking about comparison of the rates, then you need to look at demand and supply. That is what will determine the price of the exchange rate. It's not about the pronouncement that he has made. We need to look at demand and supply. If you are putting out a lot of demand, you are not getting a lot of the supply that you need. Definitely, exchange rate will just naturally goes up. If you are putting on a lot of supply and demand is not there, definitely exchange rate will come down. So it's all about market forces. If you talk about convergence, if you want to do the reconvergence of the rate, it has to be determined by market forces, not by your pronouncement. Or and then again, like I said, availability of dollars to those that will need it. But the challenge here with this, or whether it will convert or not, is because Nigerians depend solely on most Nigerians and most of the product that we consume, we depend from they are imported into this country. So definitely it's going to have an impact on what will have an impact on the exchange rate. So I think what we'll be looking at is are we able to meet up demand? Are we able to meet up legitimate demand? We're not even talking about other demand that people will say, they're just trying to hold legitimate demand from the manufacturers, from the organized labor, for those that want to pay school fees, for those that want to travel. That's what really matters. A situation whereby the bank has already reduced demands of school fees, how much they can pay for school fees, and how much they can pay in terms of PTE. Definitely, you already have a challenge there. That means they're not even meeting legitimate demand. So definitely the rate will have to come up. So it's not about the pronouncement, it's not about the conversion. It has to do with demand and supply. And demand and supply depends on how much we are earning in our economy and how much of it are we going to be using to subsidize some of these items.
So the president also talked about inflation and GDP growth, and the CBN's Monetary Policy Committee, which has been on an interest rate hiking spree, as has many central banks across the world, was a bit of a touch point on his speech. Now, in its third meeting this year, the MPC unanimously voted to increase its monetary policy interest rates by 50 basis points to 18.5%. But the increases have not necessarily had the desired impact and have slowed growth in an already battered economy. So President Tinubu says that interest rates need to be reduced to increase investment and consumer purchasing in ways that sustain the economy at a higher level. So is that the way to go when we still have record high inflation that's coming in at about 22.04%? And it might be possible we see the MPC continuing the spree that many other central banks and MPCs across the world are also continuing on.
Well, number one, Mr. President should know that the CBN is independent. Even if we have seen the CBN operate like a parastatal of government under the previous administration, you should know that the CBN is independent and the CBN make their decision based on market indices. So you see, what I'm saying, all these pronouncements are just pronouncement. When you make pronouncement, then you need to look at the structure. How are you going to work to make sure your pronouncement comes to pass? Exchange rate hike in interest rate, exchange rates, all this cannot just happen because you make a pronouncement. There must be things that are working. When you're talking about interest rate hike, it's all determined by market forces. Inflation is going up. How do you contain inflation? You don't contain inflation by making a pronouncement. You contain inflation by making policies, bringing out policy that will bring down inflation. And once inflation comes down, then you see the rate will also come down. But I think the major challenge, I keep saying it even in the previous administration, was that the CBN itself was not ready to address the most volatile issue, which was the exchange rate volatility. I think if Mr. President and his economic team are able to address the exchange rate volatility by converging it or making it, converting it, and everybody can that wants to get dollars can get it at a rate, at a fixed rate, and those that want to doing business in Nigeria, whether to repatriate their funds, can easily repatriate their funds back to their countries. Then we could see high naturally come down. So high coming down doesn't have to do with any pronouncement. You want low interest rates, then you need to do the needful. You need to structure your economy. You need to make sure that cost of goods and services come down. And those costs will come down in terms of Nigeria. The height in cost of goods and services has to do with insecurity. We address insecurity, as if by his pronouncement address insecurity. So those are just pronouncements. It's now for them to begin to do the work.
Okay, so I have two more questions for you, but I want to come to something he said about job creation, promising to create some 1 million jobs in the digital economy. As you said, Mukhtar, these are just pronouncements, but I find a bit of interest in his focus or in his mention of the digital economy. What do you make of that?
You see, when it comes to electoral promises, you don't want to go back to what they told us before, because it's the same party. Remember, this is the party that told us that in their first month in government, they're going to create 176,000 jobs. We never had one job. And for the 8 years of the former president, we saw Nigeria move to a situation where 90% of our youth were jobless. I mean, underemployed. And the way you look at it, there was a high number of jobless Nigerians. So I want to take those promises as more or less, like I said, a pronouncement. We need to see the work. When you're talking about digital economy, just we made something mention about it, based on about the CBN redesign policy. That policy is a good policy, but it failed because they don't have the infrastructure. So when you're talking about the digital economy, you need to be talking about infrastructure. A digital economy that the former Minister for Communication said that they should give tax waivers to the telecom company, and the Minister of Finance refused. And that's a digital economy that you want to create jobs. So you're not even ready to give tax waivers so that they can come in and create those jobs. So those are structural issues that he needs to address. When you talk about digital economy, it's not just because you want to get the youth excited that, oh, we are going into digital economy. No, we must have to build infrastructure. We must have to build infrastructure. They must have to make our nation a hub. And if you have to build infrastructure and make your nation a hub, then you need to improve your infrastructure. And one of the key infrastructure in terms of digital economy is power. And it's non-existent as it stands.
And he has made some promises concerning power for businesses as well as households. But this is my final question, because at the end of the day, the president is not going to do this alone. And many of us are waiting with anticipation to hear about those who will make the president's economic team, from the Minister of Finance to the Economic Advisory Council. And there is speculation as to who those people could be. I'm more interested in what their experience should be for the time that Nigeria finds itself. So we know that former President Muhammadu Buhari had the likes of renowned Nigerian Professor Doyin Salami and Bismarck Rwani as members of his economic team. But we're not sure how much difference that made for the economy. So without too much speculation as to who these individuals may be, let's talk more about the criteria, the experience, and the profile of those who will help drive Nigeria's economy under the Tinubu administration. What should we be looking for? What do you think President Tinubu has probably searched for and most likely found? We're just waiting on the announcement.
Well, we need a Nigeria that will take the bull by the horn. We need a minister that will be accepted internationally, that has a global presence. We enjoyed that. What we enjoyed in the administration of former President Olusegun Obasanjo was because he had a Minister of Finance that was accepted globally, that was respected globally. So we saw the result in terms of economic policy, debt forgiveness, and others. So Mr. President should look for a minister or an economic team that will be respected. When it comes to Bismarck Rwani economic team or Doyin Salami, you should remember that they are not economic team per se. They were advisory board. And when you have advisory, you don't have power. So I expect Mr. President to have an economic team, not just an advisory economic team, but an economic team that he needs to sit with and listen to, not an advisory economic team that needs to sit with the Minister for Finance. And after advising them, they send it, Mr. President has the right to take it or leave it. So you need to begin to look at the economy management team, like what was obtained during the time of President Olusegun Obasanjo. He had an economy management team that was private sector driven, that took policy with the then Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Also, President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan did the same thing. Got an economic team that was not an economic team that was made up of only politicians, governors, and ministers, like what we had in the previous administration. So think an economic team that will be private sector driven, a minister for finance and economic planning that will be respected globally. And if you ask me, I think that at this time, Nigeria needs a global figure to begin to turn around its economy, a figure that can stand and begin to attract foreign direct investors. Remember that has shrunk is in the previous administration. I think it's even non-existent. So we need to attract foreign direct investors, and we need to attract portfolio investors. And I think President Tinubu said it that that he wants to run an economy whereby investors can be able to bring in their money and they will be able to repatriate their money. I expect him to hit the ground running on that by making sure that the CBN pays those airlines that said their money are trapped here in Nigeria, and so that Nigeria can begin to enjoy a little bit of relief in terms of the aviation sector. If you do that, then you send in a signal to the international community and to international investors that it's not going to be business as usual, things have changed. And with that, it could just create a snowball effect that will have an immense turnaround in our economy, especially in the era of convergence of the exchange rate.
Thank you so much. Just say yes or no to this. We expect to see a more capitalist, free market-driven economy under President Tinubu. Is that what you also think? Yes or no?
Yes.
All right. And I
absolutely think yes. And his speech said it that he's a capitalist. His speech have said it, or we should be prepared for a PPP type of administration.
All right. And many will be looking for a change in things from the Buhari administration. Mukhtar Mohammed, thank you so much for joining me on this conversation, looking at President Tinubu's first speech and, of course, a few of the things he laid out towards his economic vision. We await the details. We await the combination and the announcement of his economic team. As my guest has said, not just an advisory team, but a team that can take the tough decisions that Nigeria needs taken at the point in time the country finds itself.